amazing coax among like the mainstream gaming journalism industry right now is this idea that like, oh man, turn-based games, they're making a comeback. I really love Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI because I'm a boomer who only plays the classics. They don't make games like this anymore. Like, have you not played a Nintendo console? Okay, like I am swamped with turn-based games all the time, whether it's like Fire Emblem or Pokemon or like what have you. As a Nintendo fan, I've been drowning in these turn-based games for decades. Like I have so many of these things I have to get through, and to see people sit there and try and act like, oh man, turn-based RPGs, they're an extinct species. They went the way of the dinosaur. An asteroid hit the planet and just killed. Like, no. Like, how out of touch are you? Do you play anything other than like the flavor of the month, XRPG? Like, do you know anything outside of like Witcher 3? Like, are you like familiar with the genre at all? Like, I can't imagine that anybody who's even remotely familiar with the genre would ever think that there was ever like a dearth of turn-based RPGs, because that is just completely incorrect. You can argue that like, I want Final Fantasy to be turn-based. Yeah, that's true. Final Fantasy should be turn-based, but you also have reasonable alternatives, from the same developers. You do have Dragon Quest, you do have Bravely Default, you do have like, Saga, or like, dozens of options, right? And then of course you have like, games from other developers like Suikoden, like Tales or something I got into recently. Like, there was just, well, Tales isn't turn-based, but like, you know what I mean, right? Like, there are just so many like options out there if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Like, this idea that like, Persona 5 or like, Atlas specifically like ushered in this trend is just laughably stupid, because the most popular RPG on the planet is and always has been turn-based. People love to ignore Pokemon's existence when it comes to this kind of thing. But like, oh, wait a minute. Recently, the talking point has been that Pokemon shouldn't be turn-based, that it's holding the franchise back. I saw that Arlo video. I saw that Blue Muppet like sit there and try and tell us that like, I want to call out commands like the anime. Like, on. Come on. Like, the same people who are crying about like Nintendo RPGs being turn-based are celebrating this supposed renaissance of turn-based RPGs that never really went anywhere to begin with, if you were a complete pleb and stuck with Nintendo consoles. Like, that's kind of my opinion. Like, whenever people start like hyping up like bullshit like Baldur's Gate 3 or Expedition 33, like, do you actually play games? And inevitably the answer is always no. Because if you actually played RPGs, you would understand that Baldur's Gate 3 is not in any way impressive. You would understand that Expedition 33 is not something that's worth simping over. You would understand like the value of Pokemon and like all of Nintendo's like numerous IPs. Like, you wouldn't be sitting there acting as if like turn-based RPGs have become increasingly rare if you were actually playing them on Nintendo hardware, right? It's just a gigantic cope, honestly. To me, it just seems like, companies are trying to jump onto the fact that like Final Fantasy is a dead brand and they're trying to become the new Final Fantasy. But like, why exactly are people going along with this? Why are they so desperate to convince people that like that that we're getting like these great turn-based RPGs when we're really not, you know? It's just kind of embarrassing. And what's more is that like the people who are saying this, you know, considering the kind of RPGs they play, you know, Persona 5, you know, they don't have any standards. They're absolute bottom of the barrel slop. You know, they don't play anything of value. They spend hundreds of hours, you know, like in Persona 5 maxing out social links so they can like, you know, have a sexual relationship with the teacher, right? Like that's the average Persona 5 fan, you know. Instead of going out and talking to a girl in real life, they'll spend hundreds of hours grinding out like charisma stats in order to like I don't know, like talk to Futaba or whatever. It's like it's disgusting, you know, like there's really no value to like a lot of these like popular mainstream like turn-based RPGs at all. You know, the better ones, the ones that are primarily Nintendo games, have and always have are and always have been completely unnoticed by the mainstream. You know, like nobody remembers how good like Batten Kaitos was. You know, nobody remembers like you know all the great Game Boy Advance RPGs. You know, nobody really talks about like how great Fire Emblem Engage was. You know, like turn-based RPGs that are on Nintendo platforms that have gone completely ignored by the masses because it goes against the deeply held narrative that like Nintendo doesn't have RPGs. It's definitely it's not something that people openly say anymore, but it's definitely the implication you get whenever you listen to these people. Like these people don't actually know anything that's out there. They don't actually play any games. They don't actually try anything. Uh, as a result of that, they have this very warped view of of gamer culture. You know, they believe that turn-based RPGs are a dying genre when that really, truly, 100% is not the case. However, we do need to start celebrating the success and popularity of Nintendo's turn-based RPGs because for too long, these games have gone completely ignored.